In 1997, the movie opens in Wroclaw, Poland. A fax explaining the nearness of a major flood is delivered to the office of politician Jakub Marczak. However, he and his co-workers decide to overlook it for the time being because they don't believe it to be that significant. The action then jumps ahead 6 weeks, when we see Jasmina Tremer, a rational and driven individual who lives in Netherlands with her spouse. The fax was sent by the hydrologist. She sees a stunning mother doe and her fawn while checking the water level in the nearby wetlands. As she attempts to get a closer look, a thoughtless hunter shoots fire on it. Jasmina races to the scene in an attempt to help the hurt animal. Unfortunately, it's too late, and the doe dies. Jasmina becomes so infuriated by this that she snatches the hunter's ID by the collar. After that, she goes back to her van to spend some time with her lover. Jasmina speaks with him about the issue and then enters the private area to sip methadone, a medication that aids in heroin withdrawal. The pair then engages in coitus while they continue to share a romantic moment. Unfortunately, a huge chopper that is arriving outside cuts short their moment. It turns out that Jasmina's immediate presence in Wroclaw is required by the Polish military. Jasmina goes to the city's emergency center in the following scenario. The politician Jakub, who also seems to be her old friend, greets her upon her arrival. After guiding her to his workplace, she meets a number of scientists and commanders. Additionally, there is a broadcast network to inform and update the population. In the course of the conference, Jasmina presents her latest research, indicating that Wroclaw is in danger of flooding and that immediate action is required to avert disastrous outcomes. She discovers, nonetheless, that the group is using antiquated information from the 1960s. This indicates that their readiness for the approaching flood is inadequate. She quickly asks for thorough data sets and maps to work on when they request for a perfect model to follow. Then Jasmina gives them the assurance that the blueprints will be completed by tomorrow, which will enable them to take the necessary actions to halt the flooding. The following morning, Jasmina strolls beside the colonel to assess the water level in the city. She deduces right away that the water underneath the surface is increasing. After that, they visit the adjacent town of Kiti, when she discovers that the flood banks would fall if the water level increases by 2 more meters. Jasmina encounters Andrzej Rybacz, a local, while doing an inspection, and they talk about the potential of flooding. Even Andrzej is surprised when she discovers moist walls in the basement of his house. The topic of his dad, a war hero who is currently hospitalized at the local hospital, comes up next. Jasmina wants to talk to him about previous flooding incidents. Meanwhile, Jakub finds out there's going to be an event as he gets close to a reservoir. He gets upset with the managers for not taking down the event in spite of several warnings. The manager attempts not to hear him, but Jakub pushes him into complying by threatening to dismiss him. Jakub then goes to a bakery owned by Mrs. Bazia, an old woman. He grabs a few loaves of bread and heads quickly to the apartment next door, making it clear that he is a frequent client. He then goes to the house of Mrs. Tremer, who is Jasmina's mother and is overweight and confined to a bed. It comes out that Jakub is caring for Mrs. Tremer at the moment due to their strained relationship. The following morning, Jasmina gets ready for her model plan and talks about it with her male colleagues. Her findings lead her to emphasize how critical it is to act quickly to stop flood damage. She notes that the leaves are turning yellow since there is so much water underground. The city center is now safe, but northern states are in danger. To allow the waterway to flow freely, Jasmina proposes breaking up the flooded banks in the adjacent settlement of Domaniewo. She concluded that this action would lessen significant floods. Because the flooded banks shield them from increasing water levels, Jakub is worried and asks Jasmina why they would think of blowing them up. She retorts that while flood banks are beneficial during mild or moderate flooding, they are detrimental during large flooding since they actually boost the water levels. After learning this knowledge, Jakub becomes convinced and gives his men the command to be ready for the destruction plan. When Jasmina arrives in Domaniewo the next day via helicopter, she finds many structures beside the river as well as a weir. She observes that the topography differs from the ones shown on the supplied maps. She instantly realizes that the globes are dated 1967 after adding 2 and 2. The pilot then tells her that the Latka dairy business benefited from the construction of the dam a few years ago. The foundation for their conclusions is drastically altered by ecological changes, which casts doubt on her theory. It implies that regions close to rivers change throughout time. When Jasmina notices that the terrain has changed, she tells the pilot to get back to the city right away. She heads immediately to Jakub's place and informs him that their original plan to destroy the flood banks in Domaniewo is now unsuccessful. When she asks him to postpone, he quickly notifies the military. However, in the isolated plains of Domaniewo, the line isn't functioning correctly. The colonel blows up the flood walls just as he is trying to get the word out to the soldiers. Latka Dairy gets flooded as a result, harming a large number of animals. The delegate accuses Jasmina of putting up a poor strategy the following day. She accuses them of giving her an antiquated map, nevertheless. She also alerts them to the possibility of floods in the city center. Jasmina predicts that the river will rise quickly due to variations in the city's ground level, and eventually, the city center will be submerged by the water as it would have nowhere else to go. Jasmina highlights that the amount of water present is already 3 times greater than typical. A journalist hears what they are talking about as they are having their discussion. Following the discussion, Jakub confronts Jasmina about her previous heroin addiction, implying that this problem may be connected to her misjudgment. However, she ignores him and leaves the office quickly without responding properly. Later on, in return for information, the news journalist offers to drive her home. Jasmina concurs, and during their trip she tells him that the province will be flooded by the convergent waves of the 5 rivers that make up the metropolis. It means that the city as a whole will essentially disappear. The discovery terrifies the reporter, and Jasmina quickly instructs her to pull over ahead of a well-known structure. The citizens of the city become terrified as soon as word of the floods begins to circulate around the metropolis. The following scene finds Jasmina knocking on her mother's apartment door, leaving a note alerting her to the flood dangers and pleading with her to evacuate right now. She then proceeds to Mrs. Basia's market, where she is greeted cordially by an old woman. Jasmina begs the woman to temporarily transfer her mother into her apartment over a private chat. Basia acknowledges this and says that Jakub had been looking after her mother for a while. Jasmina bobs her head in gratitude and looks a little taken aback before heading out of the market. Afterwards, Clara, Jakub's daughter, stops by the place where Jasmina stays and inquires about her connection with her father. Jasmina avoids giving the young person the whole truth, but she does engage him with a few insignificant facts about their job together. At that moment, Jake comes on the scene and asks Clara to stay in the car and wait for him. Jasmina makes it clear that she didn't tell the little child anything once they are alone. Then it's revealed that Clara truly is her daughter, and the two were formerly romantically involved. However, Jasmina's previous heroin addiction prevented their relationship from working out. When she later goes to the train location, she discovers that it is closed because of the floods. With no other option, Jasmina goes back to Kedi village to do more investigation. She stumbles on a limb and falls to the level ground below as she is at it. At this point, she finds a German railroad track beneath the bridge that connects the hamlet to the town, as well as a water reservoir. Sensing a problem, Jasmina heads straight to the municipal hospital to talk with Andrzej's father regarding the flood. The elderly guy goes on to say that during the war, a bridge was constructed where trains had passed, and the steam engines were powered by the crane's water reservoir. When Jasmina hears this, she becomes anxious and leaves the hospital right away. She immediately makes her way to the headquarters, where she tells Jakub that the stream in Kedi village is flowing back into its original channel. Right now, blowing up the water's banks is the best course of action. Given how many people live there, Jakub believes it will be extremely difficult to carry out such a mission. However, Jasmina claims that there is no other method to stop a significant flood. Jakub discusses the topic with the vice minister of his political party after she departs, but the latter mocks the idea and tells him not to go forward since it would provoke a reaction from the media. Rather, he suggests using the media to one's benefit. Jakub gives his secretary instructions to disclose the details of the destruction plan in Kedi village as directed by his superior. The intentions to blow up Kedi's flood banks and the neighboring village areas are soon reported by the media. The goal of this operation is to prevent the approaching wave from flooding Wroclaw's city center. The locals oppose the idea and block Jasmina's route to the flood banks when the army later arrives at the village. It seems sense that they are incensed over having to give up for the sake of the city, while being refused assistance for their own disaster. As everything is going on, Clara searches through her father's personal belongings and discovers some pictures of him and Jasmina. She carries them with her because she's intrigued, and she quickly closes the cupboard when she hears someone approaching. Her father is calling, urging her to prepare her possessions as quickly as possible. After that, Jakub sends her away at his housekeeper's residence so they can get ready for the approaching flood. After that, he makes his way to the office where he addresses the media and assures them that everything in Wroclaw remains under control. Jasmina gets there just in enough to hear him declare that the situation has forced him to halt his political campaign. When she discovers he is lying about the floods, she gets enraged and rushes out of the office. Jakub tries to explain his circumstances as he pursues her, but Jasmina is more worried about Clara's security. She runs to their daughter's present address as soon as she can. As the water levels rise, rats begin to emerge from the canals and disperse across the communities. Jasmina tells Clara not to leave the residence for the next several days in order to protect her safety as soon as she arrives at the doorstep. The adolescent says she wants to demonstrate something and shakes her head in agreement. After that, she enters the house and takes out the pictures she discovered in her father's drawer. However, Jasmina has already departed the apartment, much to her dismay. In the meanwhile, Jakub learns that the vice minister has approved the previous event, which he had canceled. He becomes enraged by this and fights with the occasion's manager as a result, but he's still not been able to stop them. However, Jasmina heads over to her mother's house to inform her about the flooding and convinces her to leave her house. Her mother, however, reproves her for at once being concerned about her after years of being abandoned. She is disappointed that Jasmina and Jakub were unable to work things out in their relationship. While they are still fighting, Jasmina discovers a damp area on the wall. Numerous spiders are making their way toward the top level from it, seemingly in an attempt to escape the floods. Jasmina becomes extremely alarmed upon realizing that a major calamity is about to strike the city. She immediately dashes outside the U.S. Embassy to phone the governor and tell him of their precarious condition. Meanwhile, the people of Kitty are terrified by the reports of rising water levels and are getting ready with sandbags to prevent the disaster. When a nurse at the city clinic notices that the fluid levels in the garden have significantly increased, she quickly notifies the chief physician. Authorities at the municipal zoo are seen removing the animals at the same moment. A staff member notifies the management that Wally, one of their dangerous crocodiles, has escaped, which is a dire turn of events. The crocodile is shown in the last image ambling into the city center. The movie finishes here.